Okay, then I'm going to introduce our speaker for today, Gail Walter. I first met her with the KEC. I never did know what that exactly stood for, Kalamazoo Environmental Committee or Council or something. Um, and she was talking about the urban bird treaty, I believe it was called. And it sort of intrigued me, what the work that she was doing. And so I thought, why not have her come here and talk about climate and birds and also her work with the treaty. So this talk will be how climate change affects birds and how to have bird-friendly communities that will help both the climate and the birds. She's a retired veterinary pathologist and health coach. Her longtime interest is in all things nature and the environment. So, and she's involved with numerous conservation and environmental based groups. Hopefully, she'll also be in Lansing on the 26th with one of those groups. But it includes the Audubon, the Wild Ones, as the um, Conservancy. She's a Peregrine Falcon coordinator for resident falcons and the liaison between birds and community DNR and building owners. And the bird treaty actually is involved with the buildings. So without further ado, Gail, you're on.
Well, thanks. Thank you, Nikki, for the introduction, and thank all of you for spending a beautiful Friday noontime here in front of your computer with me. So I appreciate the chance to talk with you and share some of this information that I'm really interested in and have been working on for a while. So, as Nikki said, this is really a talk that I hope will demonstrate the overlap between climate change, losses that we've seen in populations of birds, and bird-friendly communities. So we'll just get started here. Report that came out in 2019 that looked at 529 species of birds in North America demonstrated that there has been a precipitous decline in the number of birds that are present here in North America as well as globally. But in North America, we have lost basically 3 billion birds in the last 50 years. And even probably just as equally shocking, the State of the Bird report that came out in 2022 demonstrated since, again, 1970, that there are 90 species of birds in the US that have lost 50% or more of their population. And of those 90 species, 17 are found within Kalamazoo County and 10 of them breed here. So of that 90 species of birds that have declined 50%, 70 of those 90 species are on a trajectory to lose another 50% within the next 50 years, or to have numbers that are so low that they really can't be statistically tracked. And so of those 70, we call tipping point species, 9 are found here in the county and 4 of them breed here. So Audubon, National Audubon estimates that there's 389 species globally that are on the brink of being lost due to climate change and increased temperatures. So those are some pretty dire statistics to wrap your head around. We know that not all groups of birds have lost their numbers in equal proportions. Some groups of birds have been have lost their population more dramatically than others. So I'm just going to highlight a few of those. So one of the groups that has lost the largest number of birds are birds of the boreal forest, so sort of northern Canada. We know that a third of that population has been lost. And an example are evening grosbeaks, where 9 out of 10 of those grosbeaks are no longer present. Eastern forest birds are birds that we're more likely to see here in Michigan. Again, this is a group that's been hit pretty hard. with losses. And we know that in the example that is given are wood thrushes. And if you are birders and know what a wood thrush looks and sounds like, you know the loss of that beautiful voice in the woods is really it's really sad. Grassland birds have been hit especially hard. We know that over 50% of grassland birds have been lost. And example of that, though, that group are eastern meadowlarks. And I will challenge any birder to tell me if they remember the last time they heard or saw an eastern meadowlark. Aerial insectivores have also been pretty impacted by these population declines. So those are swallows, swifts, purple martins. And so an example is barn swallows that have lost 2 out of 5 of their species. Global shorebirds, so birds that are on the ocean coast, have lost about 1/3 of their population as well. So what? You know, I've had people ask me this. You know, they look out, they're like, well, we still see birds. You know, I look out my yard, there's birds all the time, pooping on my car, you know, making a racket in the morning. I can't sleep. What is the problem? Why do we care? So birds provide a lot of ecosystem services. They've really had our back for a long time. So they really help with habitat regeneration. So they'll eat seeds and fruit with seeds in it. And then they're likely to deposit those seeds with a little bit of organic matter, you know, in areas, say, that have been burned over by wildfires. So they really help with habitat regeneration. And then they're also very important consumers of pests. So they eat a lot of insect pests that would otherwise destroy crops or forests or cause human or animal diseases. So, you know, these could include things like Zika virus, West Nile virus, equine encephalitis. And so, you know, their services to us are pretty important. Birds also support clean water. So habitat that is good for birds is also good for people. And it's good for really any species. We all need the same things. We need clean water, we need clean air, we need safe places to live that are free of toxins and pesticides and dangers. And we need food. So bird habitat, you know, if we can support good bird habitat, we're really helping humans. And birds support human health. There's data that shows if you can hear or see birds, you score better on tests and you recover faster from surgery. They're also good for the economy. There's 45 million people in the US alone who are bird watchers, and they travel, they buy restaurant meals, they buy binoculars and spotting scopes and sensible shoes and that kind of stuff. And so they are really spending a lot of money for the economy. And as I mentioned, the birds consume a lot of pests, so they're really helping farm crops, including coffee and wine. And we'll talk a little bit more about coffee later on in the presentation. So what's causing these losses? And we know it's not any one thing. They're really, the causes, the losses are multifactorial. So let's talk about what some of the biggest ones are. And the biggest one overall is habitat loss or habitat degradation. So I'm going to talk about a lot of these things kind of more specifically as we go on. So just an overview, you know, habitats are lost for a number of reasons, you know, development, deforestation, the value of the habitat can be lost because of pollution, pesticides, noise or light pollution, and climate change, you know, can affect birds directly as well due to severe weather events, flooding, you know, and other drought, heat. We'll talk about those a little bit. Other reasons for bird declines are surprisingly high mortality because of free roaming cats. And I can't really think of a way to relate cats to climate change, but everything else I can. But we'll just, so we just talk about cats for a second. And then collisions with windows and other things in the built environment are the main causes of bird mortality. Secondary impacts when we lose birds and the number of birds and the diversity of birds, we lose a lot of stuff. We lose the ecosystem services of the birds. We lose biodiversity and the support of other species. We've got the economic impact and food insecurity from damage to crops. We end up with an ecological imbalance that can even cause further increases in climate change. And of course, our own experiences with the joy of seeing birds and nature is not a good change either. So outside of climate change and habitat loss, here's just a schematic of the proportion of some of these other anthropogenic causes of bird mortality. And you can see how shockingly out of proportion cats are. And these are not just feral cats, these are people's cats who are indoor-outdoor cats. So that's about all I can say about cats. Window collisions account for, in some estimates, up to 1 billion birds a year. So habitat loss and bird declines and climate change are all really interrelated. Each one of these can impact the other two, which is what I was trying to show in my kind of kindergarten approach to schematics here, since I'm not very good with the PowerPoint thing. So let's break these down and talk about it a little bit more. These are some of the sort of major land uses that we have here that are habitats for birds. And we know forests are lost because of logging, wildfires being burned, some development, rainforests, which we don't have right here in Michigan, but certainly there's been a lot of press about clearing of rainforests, burning of rainforests, turning rainforests into agriculture, and that's been a big impact on the climate. Woodlots are, being lost to development. Grasslands are really important habitats for birds. As I mentioned, grassland birds have been one of the groups of birds that have been hit the hardest with declines in population. And grasslands hold an incredible amount of carbon. So all of those pasture and prairie grasses with those long roots really store carbon. And when that is lost, then carbon is released, which of course has a negative impact, as any of these losses do, on climate, and also the loss of that habitat for birds. So grasslands can be overgrazed. They can be turned into agriculture. They can be turned into woodlots. They can be developed. Agricultural land uses support birds in a lot of ways, similar to what grasslands do. But we know that ag lands can be certainly developed, turned into soccer fields. Somebody told me they used to see, when they were growing up, fallow farm fields. They don't see those anymore. Nobody just leaves fallow farm fields. But if they do, sometimes they just turn into wooded areas. And, so there's the loss of habitat for those birds that need wide open spaces without a lot of tree line. And wetlands are an incredibly important habitat as well. And I want to talk about those just a little bit more, because I did some reading on wetlands and learned a few things as I was putting this talk together. So wetlands are actually one of the most carbon dense ecosystems on the planet. And peatlands, which account for just 3% of the land surface, store twice as much carbon as forests. And more than half of the original wetlands in the lower 48 states have been lost. And they continue to be lost at the rate of about 60,000 acres a year. And wetlands are disappearing 3 times faster than forests. There's a number of states that have lost more than 85% of their wetlands, and 22 states, including Michigan, that have lost between 50 and 80% of their wetlands. And even wetlands that exist may not be in good condition. Wetlands that are created for mitigation oftentimes are not able to replicate the diversity of plants and animals in a wetland, so they don't function really well. And then of course, wetlands can be degraded by contamination as well. So anyway, habitats may look okay, but if they're degraded by pollution, or even if they're used for recreation, even passive recreation, you know, with hiking trails or non-motorized trails, or heaven forbid, motorized trails, those areas may look fine to us, but they may not meet the needs of animals that are trying to use that as habitat. And loss of any of these, in addition to impacting birds and other species, certainly have a negative impact on climate change. So, and I know I'm speaking to the choir here because all of you are more well-versed on this than I am, but you know, some of the impacts from climate change, you know, include droughts, heat waves, wildfires, flooding. Those all impact bird populations. Birds are definitely affected by ambient temperature. Birds do not sweat. They do not have sweat glands. The only way that they have to control their body temperature is by panting. So when it's really hot, they can't necessarily retreat to air conditioning as we can. And so the heat definitely has a negative impact on them, and as well as drought, as you can see this poor bird on this parched landscape. Wildfires, you know, there's been a lot of wildfires this last year, you know, in Canada, you know, all over the heartbreaking wildfires in Hawaii. You know, I think about the life and property that have been lost. But when I hear about the wildfires, what I'm also thinking about is the number of animals that may have perished in those fires, who could not outfly or outrun the fire, as well as the loss of their habitat. And then flooding, of course, impacts any birds that need to use a shoreline for their habitat. Other impacts of climate change, you know, we talked about the intense storms. So increases in hurricanes and tornadoes and just really heavy rainstorms can impact birds by, you know, causing outright mortality because of the storm itself. But the storms again impact the habitat. So habitat may be destroyed secondary to a storm. Sometimes the storms move birds to a whole different location, and birds can find themselves in Europe or, you know, Asia, and in a habitat that is not compatible to their needs. There has been an increase in avian malaria. The mosquitoes that carry avian malaria need a certain temperature and climate in order to optimally exist and to carry the diseases. As the temperatures have warmed, malaria can now move to higher elevations. So birds that used to live at these higher elevations and did not used to be exposed to avian malaria are now exposed because the mosquitoes have moved up the hills and the mountains. And then we're starting to see mismatches in species phenology. So that's the timing that different species need, you know, to live. So we've got birds in migration that may miss critical times of plants blooming or insects hatching. And so when they are in migration or they reach their breeding grounds, what they need to survive they may have missed that window. So we'll talk about bird-friendly communities a little bit, and what is a bird-friendly community and how do you go about it? And then why are bird-friendly communities good for people and good for climate change as well? So there's a couple different ways to go about officially creating a bird-friendly community. Certainly, you know, any community can create its own map of being bird-friendly. But there's a couple of organizations or programs that are already set up that we'll talk about. So the Urban Bird Treaty Network through the Fish and Wildlife Service, and then one that has officially been rolled out nationally this year, although has existed in different forms for a number of years, and that's the Bird City Network. So I'm going to talk about that one first, actually, the Bird City Network. So this actually started with in Wisconsin as a one-state organization run by what I think is their equivalent to our DNR. And so, Bird City, Wisconsin has, Bird City, Madison, and Bird City, Oshkosh, and Bird City, whatever in Wisconsin. And there's other states that have also piggybacked onto that. So I know Pennsylvania has one, and Iowa, and quite a few states. Well, the American Bird Conservancy and Environment for the Americas, in partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, have now created this national, and it actually expands into Canada and Central America as well, network to be able to do this on a larger scale. So it's actually supposed to be a more flexible and cost-effective model for conservation for birds. And both the Bird City Network and the Urban Bird Treaty have these three kind of overarching goals that include habitat for birds and enhancing or expanding habitat for birds, addressing threats to birds, and then engaging people in learning about how important birds and habitats are, and sustainability. The Bird City Network, in addition, also has this component of recognition, which can actually be promoting tourism and recognition of bird cities as good places to go if you want to do some good birding. And what the Bird City Network requires, which makes it a barrier for us in Michigan at this time, is that it's really set up, as a network, and it's actually implemented and managed by local organizations. So oftentimes a state organization, and we don't have that in Michigan. There's been some talk. I've talked to a number of different people in Michigan Audubon, and we have a meeting set up next week. So, maybe there's some groups that will volunteer to be the coordinators of a program in Michigan. But right now, we don't have the ability to apply to be a bird city through this Bird City Network. So we're talking about the Urban Bird Treaty Program, which is officially the long official title is the Urban Conservation Treaty for Migratory Birds. And this is a program of the Fish and Wildlife Service, and it's actually an agreement with a municipality to, and the goal is to try to alleviate some of these population declines and create community conservation and engage people in learning about birds and bird habitat. So again, sort of the partnerships agree to these three overarching goals. And what two of the other differences with the Urban Bird Treaty versus the Bird Treaty Network, in order to apply for the Urban Bird Treaty Program, you need to be a municipality of 100,000 people or more. The Bird City Network does not have any population requirement. So even a small village of less than 1,000 people can become a Bird City Network if they have that program set up within their state. So I want to talk about what some of the potential actions are under each of these three overarching goals, and how these actions are also beneficial for climate change. So under the goal of protecting, restoring, and enhancing habitat for birds, certainly increasing the size of any green space and park and protected area is going to be beneficial for birds and beneficial for the climate as well. Ensuring the best management of bird habitat, and that's making sure that these habitats are usable. They're pesticide free. They're not impacted by, a lot of recreation. You've got good biodiversity and the number of plants that provide food and water resources for birds, and ideally using native plants and trees, which is one of the bullet points on here as well. So to back up, promoting and encouraging development of areas that are already degraded and brownfields rather than moving into areas that are natural for development is something that, you know, we should encourage all of our municipalities to do. So we know that, you know, just about any tree species is going to help provide shade. It's going to offset the heat island effect. You know, trees in general are going to store carbon, especially as they're growing. So trees in general are very beneficial for offsetting climate change. Native trees are even better, with the example of, say, oaks, which is kind of at the top of the best of the best list, because native trees, in addition to providing shade and offsetting heat island effect and storing carbon, they also are able to provide food resources for insects, pollinators, and in turn birds, because all birds need to feed their young caterpillars. So if we don't have native trees and shrubs that are supporting our pollinators, we're also not going to have birds. So again, goes without saying, decreasing or eliminating pesticide use. And then, you know, especially around Kalamazoo with the efforts to sustainability, we've talked a lot about like a walkability, you know, a people-friendly city where automobile traffic is decreased, people are riding bikes, the non-motorized transportation more, that decreases, you know, air and noise pollution, helpful for people, helpful for birds, and also creates less greenhouse gas emissions. Controlling invasive species, plant species that might overtake native species is important. It's not but as critical here in the Midwest and in Michigan, but especially out in the drier climates out west. A lot of those invasive plant species are also more flammable. So those grasses, invasive grasses, are putting those environments at higher risk for wildfires. And then, you know, I talked about wetlands being such an important habitat and overall on the planet. So again, maintaining the wetlands and ensuring clean water in those natural waterways, doing streamside restoration with native plants. So you're also providing and ensuring habitat for birds and other species, insects and mammals, as well as really helping the climate by protecting those wetlands and keeping the carbon stored. So native landscaping, I know I'm preaching to the choir here because many people are already native landscapers and perhaps members of Wild Ones, but so a lot of ways to find out what plants are native to your area. Audubon happens to have something on their website where you can plug in your zip code and it'll tell you what plants are native in your neighborhood. Bird-friendly coffee. So traditional coffee plantations are in a multi-layered canopy. So the coffee trees may be under larger shade trees, and then there's grasses and other shrubs underneath the coffee trees. That traditional coffee plantation provides shade, provides moisture, provides plenty of resources for insects as well as birds. So our birds that breed here that we think about as our birds really spend probably more of their time in Central and South America on their wintering grounds. And this is where they need to go. What has happened to many of those traditional coffee plantations is that they've been clear cut and replanted with a monoculture of coffee trees that grow well and fast in the shade or in the sun. So these trees grow faster, the coffee can be harvested faster, gotten to market faster, but these are monocultures. They do not support a diversity of other plants or animals or birds. So they're basically kind of deserts with coffee trees on them. And so buying bird-friendly coffee and using bird-friendly coffee yourself, or if you're in a group or a community and getting that group or community or organization to use bird-friendly coffee as well is, you know, it's really something that's going to help our birds and help climate change and the planet in general. So let's talk about goal number 2, which is reducing hazards to urban birds. Anything that can offset climate change, declaring a climate crisis, any work towards mitigating climate change is going to be helpful for birds, as well as obviously the climate. Bird safe building design is a topic that I am very interested in and have been working towards for a long time. And I've got a couple slides coming up that I'll talk a little bit more specifically about bird safe building design and how that can be helpful for birds and the climate. So bird friendly lighting, talk about this, and a lights out program, especially during migration, is important. Lights will attract birds. A lighted island of a city will attract birds. Birds are kind of blinded by the light, as we are if we're walking down a street at night and there's headlights facing us. So they get disoriented. They can end up crashing into buildings. And light in general, we've lost, there's too much light reflected in the atmosphere. We've really lost our dark skies. This disorients birds when they're migrating, as well as causes a hazard because of collisions. We recognize that lighting, I think sort of the mantra now is lighting what you need, when you need it, and where you need it, and only as much as you need. So actually LED lights have made this a lot worse. LED lights take a lot less energy use, so it helps the greenhouse gas impact, but they're a lot brighter. And so lighting is being switched to LEDs. They're on all the time, they're cheap to run, they last forever, and they're glaringly bright. They're oftentimes in kind of the blue spectrum instead of the more incandescent yellow spectrum. The blue spectrum is more detrimental to birds. It disorients them a lot more. And so the recommendation, of course, is to turn lights off, put lights on motion detectors, use lower Kelvin lights, so that these bright lights are even, and certainly have lights that are directed down and only where you need it. Lighting is also, night lighting is also has a negative impact on trees and on plants. And lights that shone up into the atmosphere, don't help anything, and they disorient birds even more. These bright LED lights are even detrimental to people and cause a problem for safety and for police if they're trying to see across a lighted parking lot at night looking for a perpetrator or even take a picture. They can't see either because these bright spotlights are in their eyes. They can't really see what they need to see. So addressing disturbance from feral and invasive animals. So again, cats are on here. I can't really relate cats to climate change, but certainly I can to deer. So deer, as we know, there's a lot of deer. They overbrowse. Anything, between the ground and 6 feet up is likely to be browsed by deer. So they really have a negative impact on the habitat that birds and other animals need to live and to nest if they're ground or low nesting species. But also they consume many new species of tree saplings that are trying to come up. So as our tree canopy matures and these trees get to the end of their lifespan, there are no new trees that are being generated to replace those. And so given another 20 or so years, the impact to the tree canopy is going to be staggeringly obvious. So the lack of control of deer is going to have a huge impact on the tree coverage, and that will have a negative impact on climate change. So collisions, the strategy for keeping birds from flying, so reducing collisions and how this also helps climate change. So two of the strategies for decreasing collisions, well, one of them is a lot less windows, which is also positive for climate change. Having something between the bird and the window as in this middle picture with the New York Times, this grill work was put up not necessarily for birds, but to decrease glare and the heat effect for the people working in that building. So not only does it protect birds from flying into the window, it also helps the climate control within the building. So they have to run the air conditioning less greenhouse gas. The other thing that can be done for to decrease bird collisions is to create a pattern on the window that birds recognize now as a solid object and not as a passageway. So there's a lot of fun perforations that can be put on the outside of the window. You can see, so these are like the bus wraps that you see with the designs on them, and like Oaken Brothers has got a big one, you know, in their windows with hiking boots on it. So this also decreases the glare and the heat inside the building when the sun is coming through the windows. So again, helps to regulate the climate control within the building, so there's less greenhouse gas that's being created from use of air conditioning and heating in the winter. So bird-friendly community actions, and I won't talk about these specifically, but certainly educating anybody about habitat is going to be beneficial for birds and as well as climate change. So if we've got a minute, I can run really quick through why I think Kalamazoo is really cool about birds and why I thought we deserved to be an urban bird treaty city, which I guess I didn't give an update on that either. Anyway, just real quickly, we have over 300 species of birds that live in Kalamazoo County. 15 of those are listed as endangered or threatened by the state of Michigan, and 11 are special concern federally. And Klein Select Reserve has got the most species of birds in Kalamazoo. IBAs are internationally recognized criteria of areas that are important for bird conservation. We have 5 of them in Kalamazoo County: Kalamazoo River, Port Custer Recreation, Port Custer Training Area, the Nature Center Grassland, and Austin Lake Upton Pond. We have 3 MODIS tracking towers in Kalamazoo that detect species of birds that are radio tagged that were not known to fly over this area. And if you're a birder and use eBird, eBird is a free app from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. It designates an area as a hotspot if there's a lot of people that go to that area to bird. We have 97 in the county. So here we go. The fact that you can only do a little is no excuse for doing nothing. And my favorite researcher, Dr. Seuss, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing's going to get better. It's not. Thank you very much. I'll take questions. To say, even if you got, even if we fix climate change, birds are still going to be flying into windows. So, it takes all of us, coming at it from different directions to make an impact.
Mark, you have a question?
Yeah, it's a sunny September day, and I'm looking out my window right now at my blooming goldenrod, and there are a fair number of insects, bumblebees, honeybees, flies, and wasps at the goldenrod, but not as many as I remember from even 10 years ago. So we know a whole lot more about bird populations because they are relatively easy to track and identify. Probably we know less about insect populations, but I'm pretty sure that the numbers of insects are considerably down, and maybe in roughly the same percentages as some of the bird species you cited. So I wonder if you know anything about that, and of course, as insects decrease, so do the insectivore birds.
Right, and you are absolutely right, Mark. And you think about, back in the olden days when we didn't all have, gray hairs and achy joints, when we would drive at night, our windshields would be covered with bugs. You drive around at night anymore, you don't have bugs plastered to your headlights or your windshield. And so you're right, there has been an absolute apocalypse of insect collapse. And I don't have those numbers because my focus tends to be birds, but there are groups and people who probably have a lot more specific data about that. You know, we are a population that is afraid of bugs. You know, it's like I am probably the only yard on the block that is not being sprayed with something, you know, you know, to kill the bugs, to kill every mosquito. And so we know that all of those, like, you know, Mosquito Watch and Mosquito Net and Mosquito Joe companies don't really kill mosquitoes because they're spraying in the middle of the day, but they're killing everything else. And so it's home, you know, owners, it's crops, you know, pesticide use. The use of neonicotinoids has been a horrible impact, because those are systemic in the plants and they will kill any insects that chew or use the flowers as pollination, as nectar. And so, yeah, there has been a huge impact. And so that has impacted, of course, the insectivores, the bird insectivores, but it has also impacted birds that use caterpillars to feed their young, and birds that rely on the nuts that are formed, the seeds that are formed by insects that are pollinating those plants. So yeah, it is a huge issue, and yeah, it's pretty dire. So if you look at Xerces, the organization Xerces probably has a lot of great information about that.
Would you spell that?
Oh, I can't spell in my head. It's Xerces, Xerces, and they focus on insects and invertebrates. And so it's a nonprofit scientific organization. So a quick update on the Urban Bird Treaty, which I sort of glossed over. So we in the Kalamazoo area, we have 25 partners, which include most of the municipalities in the county, applied for an Urban Bird Treaty. You know, it's to see if we could be granted as an Urban Bird Treaty city. And we were denied. Our application was not successful, although we were encouraged to apply again. They said we were really close, and they were debating whether to give us the thumbs up or the thumbs down, and gave us a thumbs down and asked, you know, for a rewrite. They say they asked for more information. Basically, I gave them too much information. I gave them way too many details, and I got an example of Nashville, who successfully had their application approved, and their application was 32 pages long with a lot of graphics and pretty colors and charts and very general statements. Ours was like 200 pages long with a lot of detail and text, and apparently that overwhelmed the Fish and Wildlife Service. So I need to go back, take out most of the content, put in more pictures, and just talk like in generalities, and we should get it. But I'm taking a breather. I'm really just need to come up for air. So
Is there an advantage to having that approval?
well, that's a good question, and thank you. So one of the advantages is that there is a kind of an improved status for Urban Bird Treaty communities to apply for grants from the Fish and Wildlife Service, small grants. I mean, you can apply for grants. Actually, Kalamazoo has got grants through the can't remember the name of the grant programs. Anyway, you know, they currently have some grants. So you don't have to be an Urban Bird Treaty city to get these grants, but it gives you kind of a leg up. But also I think it's a kind of a feather in the cap, if you will. It's a recognition of and a commitment to sustainability. And what I, you know, hope is that it keeps people's, you know, keeps their focus on things through the lens of how will this impact birds. So it creates commitments to those overarching goals that we need to, you know, we said we're going to, you know, maintain habitat. We said we're going to reduce window collisions. We said we're going to have a nights out program. We're going to keep cats indoors. And so, you know, each of the partners, you know, will have a role in, you know, what we have told the Urban Bird folks that we're going to do as a community. So
Okay,
I
and
think
this
it'll
is a,
keep people, keep people's like, well, we said we're going to do this, so we got to do it now.
okay, and it's a county-wide initiative.
Well,
It's
I'm looking at it as a county-wide initiative. So we have the County Parks and Recs department as one of our partners. We've got the major cities, and we've got quite a few of the townships.
Okay.
We don't have Kalamazoo Township as a matter of fact, but we have most of the other townships. Just saying, Mark, just saying.
Never saw it cross my desk.
Okay, we'll try again. Well, you guys were kind of in the midst of hiring and firing people, and it was you had some other things on your agenda. So, but you can still be a stakeholder without being a partner. So, not a problem.
Okay. Now, a really mundane question. You said there's an increase in avian malaria. Can people catch malaria now from birds?
No, there are people and bird. So you have to be bit by a mosquito carrying malaria.
Okay, so
for
okay.
humans, you have to be bit by a mosquito carrying, a form of human malaria, which thankfully we don't have yet in Michigan. God knows, with all the other arthropod-borne diseases that are here, like Zika virus is one that we didn't used to have to worry about because it was in Central America, but it's moving north as temperatures warm. So avian malaria has been recognized as a problem in Hawaii. Hawaii has had a huge loss of their native birds due to a lot of things. A lot of it has been introduction of feral animals that have decimated the bird populations. But a lot of those birds live at higher altitudes and were not previously exposed to the mosquitoes that carry avian malaria, but now they are. And they may not have any higher elevations to go to.
Okay. You were saying too that the non-native plants are more prone to fire, and that was apparently one of the problems with the Hawaii fire.
Yes.
Was that the non-native plants were what caught fire so readily. Right.
And I think we see that a lot, in wildfires here on the continent, out west. That's been a problem.
Thank you for this presentation.
And thank you everybody else for your attention and being here instead of being outside enjoying this beautiful September day.